How often are characters designed for one role and then shifted by players to another role? Oriana seemed to be support. Well, I got a fun one for you. Let's go to the depths of history. You're gonna love this one. Dang, this got 5 million views? Really?
Welcome to the League of Legends Champion Spotlight, featuring Vi, the Piltover and
we're all zoomers here, so we're gonna go at 1.5x speed.
Vi is a melee fighter who relies on devastating punches to break through her competition and take them down. With her high mobility, damage, and initiation, Vi is great at leading the charge.
Thank you, Balance Lead Freak, for telling us about Vi. We're gonna get away from this stuff. About Vi, League's new top laner. Look at her fight here against League's other top laner, Nidalee. Look at this. Incredible gameplay from Vi top. Look, she misses Nidalee with her Q, still wins. So balanced. Okay. Oh, easiest kill of her life. And then Master Yi just shows up. Static. The guy Static Shiv is named after. Oh, here's Swain. He turns into a bird. Never seen Swain do that before. Man, this really brings me back. Look at how League looked back then.
If you ever find a key opponent out of position, don't hesitate to charge right in.
Okay, but Vi finds Caitlyn in a dangerous spot. Whew, better go say hi. So the comment there is Vi was designed for top lane. That she was designed to be a top laner, and the original idea is that she'd max E, and she'd play kind of like Kunkka in Dota. Kunkka has this spell where you just attack a minion and then like it splashes back, and that was like Vi's E. Is I made it as kind of like a laning wave clear spell where you'd hit something and then it would splash back and hit the people out of it. The thing about Vi though is when she came out, it turns out her kit is god tier in jungle. Oopsies. And so when she came out, she ended up being a very powerful jungler, and then we kind of just tuned her for jungle, and then she kind of fell out of top lane. So you might be like, well, August, why didn't you nerf her out of jungle back then, right? Like, if you made her a top laner, why not nerf her out of jungle? So back then, like back in 2012, we didn't really care what role most champions went into. We kind of just made champions to be the best version of themselves, and we would target a role, meaning that, like, you know, when I was making Vi, I made her to be a top laner, not because I cared that she top laned, but because I wanted to make sure she was viable somewhere. And so we thought, oh, this kit will work top lane, therefore we'll balance her for top lane. And then, you know, turned out it was a jungle. And so back then it was more like the design strategy for champions was, you know, make a cool champion, you know, make the kit, you know, interesting and have good gameplay and be thematic and make sure they're good somewhere, and then, you know, see what happens. And then, you know, balance them for where they fit most. Nowadays, we tend to target roles and lanes a lot more to like make sure that, and there's a lot of reasons for that. One of the reasons is that like we want to make sure, you know, players are served, meaning that like if you're a top laner and you go 10 years without seeing a new top lane, that sucks, right? It's like one of the reasons that League is cool is that sometimes there's a new character that comes out in your lane that you can try out, right? And so we tend to be more deliberate with the positions we choose for characters, because we want to make sure that, you know, top laners get a character every once in a while, bot laners get a character every once in a while, supports, etc., etc. And then additionally, we tend to care about lanes more because of, as I mentioned earlier in the stream, stuff like roster goals, where it's like, ooh, you know what, we could use an AD carry support, or we could use a mid laner who is a harder to play mage, or we could use a top laner that is very juggernauty like Set, things like that, right? And so nowadays we do more deliberately target lanes when we design characters. But again, that wasn't always the case. Vi was a top laner. Didn't really work out the way I expected. Yeah. Cannot be a jungler instead of support. I think not jungle is a little risky, would be my say. Not that we couldn't do it, but that character comes into your lane with a lot of CC. And whether or not that's long-term balanceable, especially in pro play, is like a pretty open question, I'd say. One of the things that really sucks for tank junglers is pro play. And I'll say this kind of sucks for tanks in general. I'll note this. In pro play, viable tanks, and I want to really note, viable is a key word here. If the tank isn't viable to a pro, then who cares? But viable tanks are often a premium, especially in roles where there are not a lot of them. Because generally, if your team can have a tank on it, that's pretty important. Just for your ability to play the macro game and the strategic game of League of Legends, you need a character who can face check a brush, you need a character who can go ward, you need a character like who can, frontline for your team. And so when a tank is viable in a role that doesn't have a lot of other tanks, that character very often in pro play can be kind of dominant and end up having to be nerfed because, they just get played every game. For the longest time, the only viable supports were tanks. Like, you didn't see enchanters for a very, very long time in pro. And we didn't have to nerf a lot of tanks back for support because there was a lot of viable tank supports. But then, let's say all of a sudden there's 1 or 2 viable tanks in the jungle. Suddenly it's like, oh man, if I take a tank in the jungle, that opens up even more picks in the support slot. Or if I take a tank top lane, that opens up even more picks in the support of the jungle slot, things like that. And so one of the hard parts about, I think, tank junglers is it's actually really important that if the tank jungler is viable and good for the best players, that there's a lot of them that are viable and good. Otherwise, that character will be picked all the time in pro, and you'll probably have to end up nerfing it down. Anyways, so a worry I would have with Nautilus if he was a jungler is that if he was a truly viable jungler, does he go to 100% pick ban in pro, and does that end up feeling pretty bad for him at the end of the day? Don't know. I think RELL was having this issue where when she was a good jungler, it's just like, oh, well, that's a really, really strong pro flex pick, and then how do you balance that? That gets difficult. Should NAAFIRI be a jungler? I think that would be pretty sweet for her, honestly. I think there's a lot of people who would enjoy her in the jungle if we helped out that role. So personally, I'd be a fan. It doesn't necessarily mean we do it though. NAAFIRI is like very much intended to be like an assassin for mid laners, so there's a question of how well that's working out, right? But she's kind of like has a very intended role. As a comparison, I'll give you an example with like SENNA. SENNA could be a viable AD carry. And there's been metas where she is a viable AD carry. Like the first half of this year, she was a viable AD carry. Now, part of that was because of a bug that made it so she just got more souls, but like SENNA could be a viable AD carry. That said, we are always going to balance her for support first, because that is where she brings the most value to the game, in that there aren't really any AD carry supports, and that's what SENNA is. She adds that variety and interest to the role. This is similar with Pyke. Pyke at various times has been viable in other roles, and that doesn't mean he can't be viable in other roles, but it is most important that we are able to balance Pyke around support, because that is the value he's bringing to the game, is he's like occupying that space. And so with NAAFIRI, one of the things we set out to do for her is make like a more simple mid lane assassin. And we think that's like an important thing to have in the game. Now, whether or not that's as successful as it could be, if there's improvements to be made, that's a whole other question to ask. But if you're wondering like, well, why is NAAFIRI being balanced around mid? Primarily, it's there's often, when it comes to champions, a roster question that you have to ask about them. Meaning like, not only what is the coolest thing for that champion, but then also what is the interest it is adding to the game across the roster is also an important thing to think about. So